All right. Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's Ask Me Anything, where we answer your questions about cannabis legalization in New York. We do this every Wednesday at 4:20 p.m. New York City time. Although I do want to make a programming note that next week's Ask Me Anything will be on Tuesday. So while we normally do it every Wednesday, next week, Tuesday at 4:20 p.m. New York City time. I would like to welcome back those of you who have joined us for previous Ask Me Anything sessions. And for those of you who are joining for the first time, I hope that you will make it a regular occurrence. My name is Jeffrey Hoffman, and I am an attorney in New York whose legal practice focuses entirely on cannabis. If you would like to contact me, you can do that either here on LinkedIn. I welcome all connection requests, or you're welcome to reach out to me at my email address, which you can see at the bottom of the screen, info@420jurist.com, which I guess you might say makes me the 420 jurist. And as the 420 jurist, I will be answering your questions, roughly half of them from a list of questions which I've gotten from previous Ask Me Anything sessions, and roughly half from questions which you post in the comments here today. So, if you'd like to ask a question, now is the time to do so. I would like to make my usual attorney disclaimer, and that is that I am indeed an attorney, but I am not your attorney, at least not yet. Though those of you joining today that are actually my clients, don't worry, you are still my clients. But for the rest of you, I am not your attorney. Today's event is not legal advice. It does not create an attorney-client relationship, and it is not a solicitation to offer legal advice. And so, therefore, without any further ado, let's get to some of the questions that we have. And so, the first question that we will get to today is, one second here. The first question today is, do you think that receiving a cannabis license would pose any risk to SLA licensees? And my answer to that is probably not. There's nothing in the law that says that if you get or if you have a liquor license that you can't get a cannabis license. And in fact, very often, if you're a regulator, you would much rather give an additional license to someone that you've already given a license to than to someone that you've never vetted and someone that you haven't given a license to. So my take is, not only might applying for a cannabis license not hurt as far as the SLA or pose a risk, there actually might be a benefit. It's possible that the OCM would rather give a license to someone that has already been vetted by the state liquor authority and already has a license from the state liquor authority, and most importantly, has demonstrated to the state liquor authority that they are able to operate appropriately. And in such a scenario, I do think it might actually be beneficial to the applicant to already have an SLA license, and not detrimental to their SLA license, but in fact helpful to their cannabis license. Again, the cannabis business cannot be in the same physical space as the uh, alcohol business, but there is no prohibition in the cannabis law about one person or entity having both a cannabis license and a liquor license. Again, you just can't have them in the same space, can't serve cannabis where you're serving alcohol, can't serve alcohol where you're serving cannabis. All right, so that addresses that question. Do want to confirm, I do see some people making some comments, but I do want to confirm that folks in the comments are able to hear things and that everything is going okay for folks listening to the event today. For whatever reason, in the tool where I normally can see your comments, I'm not able to see them, so I've hopped over onto LinkedIn where I can see your comments directly. So if folks listening wouldn't mind just weighing in, that would be great. I'm also going to post a comment about that. All right, let's go to the next question, which did come in from the comments today. And that question is, there are over 900 CARD applications. How long do you think that will take for the OCM to vet? All right, so for this first application is going to be a two-step process. The OCM is first going to confirm that the various applications that they have received met the core requirements. That is, that the individual was either convicted of a cannabis offense prior to March 31st, 2021, or that the individual was arrested for a cannabis offense prior to March 31st, 2021, and then convicted of some other offense as part of the same transaction, and that the individual owned at least a 10% interest in a business that was profitable for 2 years. I think that part of the process the OCM will be able to do fairly quickly here in the remainder of September and perhaps first half of October. There is then going to be a fairly significant second part of the process. There were a number of documents which did not have to be submitted in the original licensing application. And so the OCM is obviously going to need to reach out to individuals and make sure that they get those questions. OCM is going to have to reach out and make sure that they have all the documentation. So, for example, you did not have to originally submit things such as your audited financial documents. You didn't have to submit your continuity plan. So the OCM, once they vetted that you meet the two core requirements, they are then going to follow up with all the organizations, I believe, that do meet the core requirements to get whatever other documents the OCM needs. And then I do think it will be a bit more of an involved process to vet all of that stuff. And then, of course, everyone knows that the OCM has to go through their scoring process so that they are able to score the applications, figure out in what order they're going to give out the licenses in each region. And I do think that'll take a little bit longer. Now, the state still has the goal of getting at least the initial stores not just licensed, but up and running by the end of the year. And that has to do with another question that we will answer here in a second. But if they're going to want to do that, they're going to have to start moving very, very quickly. There's only 3 months left for them to get that done. And heck, let's go ahead and answer the other question. I think there was another question about whether or not CBRE and DASNY had gotten any leases on any spaces yet. As far as I understand, they have not. I know that they have been working incredibly diligently to vet spaces and perhaps start negotiations. But at least as far as I know, And of course, that's not dispositive. It's entirely possible. Of course, that Dasney has signed a few leases and just isn't telling us yet. But at least as far as I know, Dasney has not actually signed on the dotted line for any spaces yet. So that gives us 3 months for them to vet all of the applications, both steps of the process, and to identify spaces, do leases on a few, and get those built and upfit and available by the end of the year. It is getting more and more challenging for them to be able to meet that end of the year goal. I think they're going to have to move very, very, very quickly, and everything is going to have to go right from here on out in order for them to meet that goal. But we shall see how those things work out. All right, let's go to a few more questions that we've had from today's session. The OCM said anyone who wants a license can get one. Do you think they are implying legacy market players? So I think you have to be very careful with that language. If I am the OCM, I'm going to want to see business entities that have coherent business plans, that have at least some amount of funding to be able to do what they want to do. I am all for the equity components of both the cannabis law and what OCM is attempting to do. I think folks that have followed me and know what I'm up to know that I'm a huge proponent of those things. But I think to say that anyone who wants a license can get one, just in the abstract, is probably not quite accurate. If you just show up and just say, hey, give me a license, I don't have any cash, I don't have any plan, I don't really know that much about cannabis, but just give me a license and let's see what happens. I don't think that's a very viable scenario for the OCM to give you a license. But hopefully what they were getting at with that is more that we're not going to hold past cannabis offenses against you. In fact, there's only a few specific past convictions itemized in the cannabis law, which will prevent you from getting a cannabis license. I think there's a few that aren't listed that the OCM and CCB will probably hold against you and not give you a license in addition to the ones in the law. It is totally in their purview as to whether or not you get a license. But again, what I think they were trying to get at is if you are a legacy player, if you have been convicted, and obviously this very first license, which we just talked about a bit, you had to be convicted of something to even be eligible to apply. So hopefully that is what they're referring to. But again, I think a bit more generic. Anyone who wants a license can get one. I don't think that is going to play out to be true. Again, if you don't have a coherent business plan, at the minimum, I do think some kind of funding, but I do think for social and economic equity applicants, they're going to be accepting a little bit light on the funding. At least initially, they're going to want to hear from you. What is your plan to raise the rest of the funding that you will need in your business plan? But again, if you do have a coherent plan and show that you have cannabis experience, or that as part of your business plan, you're going to hire people that do have cannabis experience, I do think that they're going to be looking to license as many people as have coherent plans and can coherently run the business. When you're a regulator, the last thing you want to do is give licenses to entities which eventually fail. Makes you as a regulator look terrible. Looks like you didn't do your job. So I definitely think they're going to do serious vetting of all of the applicants. And I do think it's encouraging what they've said. And as long as you have a coherent plan and some indication you're going to be able to have the funding that you're going to need to operate the business, I think they're going to look favorably upon applications. So I do hopefully think that's how everything will play out. All right, let's see if we've got some other good questions here from the... All right, my dear friend, Mr. Ortiz, who is very unhappy with the medical home grow regs that we saw recently, has some questions about, do I think we will see further modifications to that from the CCB? It's hard to say. I don't think you'll see anything in the near term, much like I don't think you'll see the legislature very excited about making any further changes to the cannabis law for a couple of years. typically when you make big laws or big regulations like this, the legislative body and the regulator typically like to see the industry operate at least for a little while before they make wholesale changes. They want to see how the operations work in the industry, the good, bad, and the ugly. Certainly, there are things they missed in the original law that we now know about. Certainly, there will be more things that need to be addressed once we open the regulated market and see how it operates. I think once a lot of people start growing in the medical space and once there's some feedback, some real actionable feedback, all due respect, Mr. Ortiz, to your items that you've given feedback, I think they're valid, but we need to hear that from more people. So once there's a lot of valid feedback from the medical community about these home grow regs, once they've started growing and seeing how the regs as they stand impact the market, at that point, I do think the OCM and CCB will be amenable to modifications of the regs. But in the very short term and even the near midterm, I think they're just going to want to see how things play out based on what they've done, and then get feedback and frankly themselves see what works and what doesn't. Get feedback from folks as far as what works and what doesn't, and then I think they will be amenable to making some changes. But I would not expect that next week or next month. So, Mr. Ortiz, I would encourage you to make some documented additional comments of what else you'd like to see change, and then when the time comes, be ready to communicate with the OCM and the CCB about that. All right, let's look at a few other questions. I'm going to go to a few we had from the backlog. Who sets the rental prices for those DASNY spaces? Will they be set at fair local pricing? So what is being referred to here is the spaces which the state is going to build for these initial retail dispensary licensees, the 100 to 150 or so folks, the justice-involved individuals. It will be DASNY or the fund or the OCM and the CCB. I think they're going to all work together, and just whatever entity amongst them, it'll probably be DASNY or the fund, actually has control of the real estate in question. They will be the ones setting the prices for rent for the DASNY spaces. Now, as far as what that pricing will be, I can't imagine any universe where this pricing is predatory. I think the state has a significant interest in getting those licensees up and running and operational within a financial model that makes sense. I mean, these licensees will already not be able to deduct this rent on their federal taxes. They will be able to on their state taxes, so that's great here in New York, but they will not be able to on their federal taxes. So I don't think the state wants to put any more of a burden on the entity than they have to. Now, that being said, as you know, $50 million is coming from the state and $150 million from private investors. And of course, those private investors are going to want a return on their investment. And the state, of course, is going to want to be able to recoup that money unless their plan is just that $50 million is allocated and there will be no recouping of those funds. It's not entirely clear to me which way that's going to work out for the state. But for the private investors, they're certainly going to want a return on their investment. And they don't get that if the state only charges these licensees what it costs the state in rent and what it costs the state to upfit these spaces. So my anticipation is that the state is going to charge a minimal amount of rent, or as minimal amount of rent as they can within the framework of having to recoup whatever rent or mortgage the state is paying on the properties, whatever it costs the state to upfit the properties, and then whatever built-in return the state is going to need for its investors. So I would anticipate that that is going to be the metric that DASNY or the fund or whomever sets the rent is going to be setting as the rent for the DASNY spaces. All right, let's get to another couple of questions here. I'm probably going to end a little early because I do have something else I have to do right after this, so we may only go another 5 minutes, so maybe another question or two. What's the latest intelligence as to when the OCM will issue the adult use regs? And again, when it comes to the regs, it is actually the CCB, the Cannabis Control Board, that issues the regs. The OCM works with the Cannabis Control Board in proposing the regs and then eventually enforcing them. But it is indeed the CCB that will be issuing the regs. Promulgating the regs is the official term of art. And we do have quite a bit of intelligence from them now. They tell us that we will see the regs by the end of the year, this year, and that the application for those licenses will open by the middle of next year. And I do hope that the CCB, in conjunction with the OCM, is able to meet that timeline. As you know, there are unlicensed dispensaries opening everywhere in New York State. I mean, there's probably a dozen within 5 blocks of my apartment, maybe 10 blocks, but there's a lot of them. And the longer the state takes to license and open the regulated dispensaries, the more of a foothold the unlicensed illegal dispensaries are going to get in the state, and the more challenging it is going to be for the regulated licensed dispensaries to operate. Now, I absolutely believe that once the licenses start getting issued and the stores start opening, that the state will enforce against unlicensed dispensaries. We certainly do not want any arrests or any incarceration. I do think one of the easiest ways for the state to do this will be for them to notify the landlords. Dear Mr. Landlord, we know landlords don't always know what's happening in their buildings, but we just wanted to put you on notice that there's an illegal, unlicensed cannabis business operating on your premises. And you may not have known about this, but you know now. And if we come back to that premises and it's still there, we're going to have to assume that you are complicit in that operation. And, we've been known to seize buildings where illegal activities have been occurring. Illegal, unlicensed, untaxed activities. So we just thought you'd like to know that, and we encourage you to act accordingly. So I do think that's one good way to get the landlords on board with acting against the illegal, unregulated storefronts on their premises. Again, I don't want any arrests, no incarceration. But in order for Governor Hochul to get to her $1.2 billion in cannabis tax revenue, which she has in her executive budget, they simply can't have a huge number of unlicensed, unregulated dispensaries operating in the state. And so there you have it. One other question we're going to deal with real quick. Is there a fixed number of licenses the state can give out? The answer to that question is no. There is not a fixed number of licenses which the state can give out. The number of licenses to be distributed, at least at this point, is entirely in the purview of the Cannabis Control Board. They can issue licenses. They cannot issue licenses. They can create new licenses like they did for the conditional adult use retail dispensary license. It's entirely up to them. Tremaine Wright has said many times that I've seen her speak that their goal is to meet the needs of the market, not to deal with some artificial cap, which would create artificial scarcity. So I do think that they're going to watch the market. When more licenses are needed, they're going to issue more licenses. When more licenses would be a detriment to the market or particular geographies, I think they will issue fewer licenses in those scenarios. But I do think at the get-go, they're going to issue a lot of licenses. New York is going to need a lot of licenses. But I do think once they get well into the process, they're going to keep their eyes on how's it going? Are there lines at dispensaries? Is there enough product in the market? Is there enough vape and other products that aren't flower? In which case, you might need more processors that are doing extraction. All of these things, I think, will play into the metric and the calculus that they use to determine how many licenses they will give. But again, there's no fixed number. There's no cap. It's totally up to the Cannabis Control Board. And I think with that, we are going to call it a day. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. We do this every week. As I mentioned at the top of the show, this coming next week, it will be on Tuesday at 4:20 instead of Wednesday at 4:20. Future sessions will be at our normal day and time. But again, next week, which is going to be October, let me make sure the correct date, October 4th, we are going to be doing our Ask Me Anything on Tuesday, October 4th, instead of Wednesday, October 5th. Finally, if you're not a connection of mine on LinkedIn, please reach out. I accept all connection requests. And finally, as excited as we all are about the forthcoming regulated cannabis industry in New York, the most important thing in the cannabis law is that cannabis is no longer illegal. We're not arresting any low-level cannabis offenders anymore. Ideally, we won't arrest any high-level cannabis offenders either. But most importantly for that, all cannabis convictions in the lower level cannabis convictions are automatically getting expunged. You higher level conviction folks, we got to file a 440 for you. So if there's anybody out there that is not getting automatically expunged, reach out to me. We're going to help you. And we also have to make sure there are no longer any nonviolent cannabis offenders still incarcerated in the state of New York. We're not going to stand for that. So that's what we're up to. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you on Tuesday next week. And then back to our regularly scheduled programming after next week. Thank you for attending today. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a great afternoon.